So guys, welcome to the Q with Q. It is me, your host, Quentin R. Giles, but you know it, we're friends. You know you must call me Q. And I am super excited to have this conversation with Miss Jade Simmons. Jade is running for president as an independent candidate, and I am excited to have the conversation because I believe, me personally, the more options, the better. And so, Miss Jade, please just introduce yourself to the people and let us know why you're running for president.
Well, Q, thank you so much for having me. We are dependent, so much so on independent media personalities like yourself, influencers who are determined to just tell the whole story. So the whole story is I'm an independent candidate, not a Republican, not a Democrat, coming to you as a wife, a mother, a concert artist, a speaker, a minister who is offering a new lane of leadership for the time that I feel we're in right now. I'm the daughter of a civil rights activist. My mother has always worked in higher education. And so I feel there's a unique set of skills required to shepherd us through this time. And so that's why I boldly tossed my hat in the ring. You know, because you've been doing your homework, you know I've been here for a while now. I'm not just popping out in July like a firework.
You didn't just come up yesterday.
I did not. I've been running since January. We didn't announce until February. Wanted to make sure we had all our paperwork in order so people would know that we were serious. And so we've been releasing serious policy and platforms. I'll end by saying, you know, I'm running to be a president for all because that's what this moment needs. We don't need any more lopsided agendas, any more red versus blue. But I will say I'm also running as an unapologetic champion for underserved communities, which of course at the top of that list are African Americans. So you'll hear me speak unapologetically about proposals, programs, possibilities that I feel we have to put in place now to undo years of systemic injustices.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are from South Carolina, correct? And you live in Houston.
That's right. I'm from Charlotte. That's right.
Well, one, be careful. I live in Houston as well, so be careful. You know, we got those twin hurricanes coming. So
I know.
Be careful on that. And you kind of really already answered my first question, which was, why did you decide to run? And I'm so glad you listed or explained, you know, you're not a Democrat, you're not a Republican, you are an independent. And so could you just unpack for us really quickly what that means? Because I think a lot of people, particularly at least my audience follows me and watches because they don't want to get into the day-to-day of the news and all of that. They come to me to break it on down, right? And so often, even as I report and tell them what's going on, it is based on a Republican versus a Democrat narrative or argument. And so could you just help us understand, what does it mean to be an independent candidate?
You had it right the first time. You said narrative. So what I want people to understand is that there's a lot of work, intention, manipulation that goes on behind the scenes to tell a very specific story. Case in point, as an independent, one of the reasons that your audience might just now be hearing about me is because most of the media leans to the left or the right. And we're in this incredible position where both parties are concerned, I'm going to split their vote. When's the last time you had a candidate where red and blue is equally concerned? And that tells us we're in a very specific time. And independent to me is the most American thing you can be. We also believe the majority of Americans are actually independent. We just every 4 years have to pick a side. And it's usually, it feels like the lesser of two evils. Most of us can count on one finger anytime we went to the poll and was passionate about a candidate. That's so rare. And so we've been running to represent the politically homeless, the muted middle, we thought. But what's been wild is people who consider themselves extremely conservative or extremely progressive are all finding a home in our campaign, which tells us those labels never really defined us. So we're trying to define Americans by their vision, what they really want. They want to be served. If they're tired of politics as usual, then I'm their candidate.
Yeah. Now, a question I think some people would have is, do you have a background in politics, right? Because we have a commander-in-chief right now that we know has no background in politics. And so I could see the easy question being, well, why you? Do you have some type of legislative accomplishments, or are there some things that you've done, you know, on the local level? Could you talk to us about your background and why you feel that fits, or that it is tenable for you to be the next commander-in-chief?
First of all, I would hope that Americans have those questions. The problem is they haven't questioned deeply enough. We just line up so blindly behind each side. And I would also offer that any reason you think the current president has failed us has nothing to do with his lack of political experience. His failures have nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with legislative experience. And if you want to talk about legislative experience, how come all 430 plus people on the right and the left have not passed legislation that's powerful? They've got 20, 30 years of legislative experience. So I come not with traditional political experience, right? Come on, think about it, right? I come to you with a new lane of experience. So you say, what does the president have to do? They have to be head of state, which means in this season, they better be a stellar communicator and one of the most sought after professional speakers in the nation, was ranked one of the best in 2020 and in 2019. And that's not because I can string the sentence together. It's because I communicate uncommonly, usually between groups that thought they didn't have anything in common. And my knack is finding that common ground. So when you go to OperationRestoration2020.com, you're going to see me talk about policy and proposals in ways that other politicians haven't, because I'm not a politician. You talk about this supposed to be for the people, by the people, of the people. Then why not a leader now who, as a mother, knows what it's like to actually choose a school for their child and have to decide between, am I going to give my child the richness of a diverse education, or do we have to go to which school has the resources to serve them where they are? That's a difficult choice, especially for an African American. You want now a leader who knows what it's like to live this American life. When's the last time Biden or Trump have pumped gas, have been in the grocery store, have run a small business through COVID-19? They are completely detached from that, yet we keep depending on them to make decisions for us as everyday Americans. So not only am I an everyday American, but my leadership experience is stellar in terms of what other companies with CEOs that are very different than the one our current president has. He's not interested in creating mutually beneficial partnerships that actually help people. So we keep bailing corporations. We don't ask them for anything in return. So we now need to partner with corporations who are looking to be a part of the solution, and they do exist. They do exist. So I come in proudly as a non-politician, no biased agenda. My mission is to serve all people.
Yeah, and you like segued perfectly. I promise y'all I did not send her the questions to this interview. I promise I didn't. When you said the bailouts for the corporations, that for me is one thing that I absolutely advocate and am a proud hard advocate is for student loan relief. And I know you went to Rice University down here in the great city of Houston, Texas, or H-Town, Maine, depending on where you're at, what side of the track you're on. And I know Rice is pretty expensive. It's pretty pricey. So talk to us about your thoughts about, one, I guess just higher education and its costs, right? Obviously, Rice University is a private institution, so the cost would be a lot higher than someone that's going to a public university, right? But there is still on the back end of that we all, once we all obtain this degree or not obtain the degree, most of us are saddled with the student loan debt, right? Yeah. And so my position has always been, as a society, the society has told us you go to school to get a higher education. That is what I heard from the time I was in elementary school. Then I go get it, right? I go to and fight to go get this education to get myself to the middle class. And then once I get it, and I'm quote unquote have a job that, can allow me to live in the middle class, I have debt that I have to stress and worry about and penny pinch to pay off. And it's just like, bro, what's going on? But continuously we see bailouts, as you just said, for big business, but we the people keep the businesses going. So with all that being said, I don't want to take over the interview, but with all that being said, what are your thoughts on, just like the state of student loans and the American people?
Yeah, I think, first of all, personally, I'm extremely blessed. All of my education was paid via scholarships as a class position. As an African American female, I was considered a rarity And so that definitely played in my favor. What we can't do is vote based on only our own personal experience. You see, that's self. We must vote on what's good for the good of the people at large. So look at my experience and understand that it's uncommon. What I have to do is say, how do we make sure more Americans have access to the experience that I have? Also, we got to broaden the narrative. We completely downplay the importance of vocational education. And here we were in COVID-19 with people not knowing how to put hands on anything. No creative skills. Our schools right now are teaching outdated education based on rote education, no critical thinking, no creative thinking, no entrepreneurship. And so we need to broaden what education means. Those corporations we're bailing out need to now bail us out with new manufacturing centers. And that needs to come with not just we're hiring and we're training you to do the job. We right now are at risk of being completely vulnerable to China, Vietnam, and Taiwan, who have the monopoly on producing processor chips in all of our technology. And the excuse is, well, the laborers are more skilled. No, our laborers are just as skilled, but we transport it for cheaper labor. So education has to be broader there. Student loan debt, if we can't convince everyone, no one's buying into free education for all right now, or else they would have nominated Bernie Sanders, would have nominated Elizabeth Warren. We already got the skinny on where people stand. So when you do that, you must be strategic. What I propose is strategic debt forgiveness based on the needs of American society right now. COVID-19 left us with a dearth of healthcare providers. We saw, man, we don't have enough nurses and doctors. So what do we prioritize? Students who are going into healthcare, we prioritize debt forgiveness there. Where else? Education. In the Black community, we need serious education reform, actually all across the board, because history needs to be rewritten, but that's a whole other story. But
that's
now
a whole other story, right?
Students going into education, they get loan forgiveness. You got teachers out here working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. Now you're asking them to create COVID plans for the classroom on top of everything else, and they're drowning in debt. Thirdly, you would prioritize student loan forgiveness for those going into criminal justice reform, criminal justice law enforcement, because we have proof now that when you have more Black faces, more people of color in education and law enforcement and in healthcare, they serve those communities better. So what we have to start doing is not just standing on these same battle lines that we've drawn that are old and stale, but we've got to change the narrative and say, okay, well, let's start here. Let's start here with these 3 areas that would get us a benefit across the board. And so that's what I would prioritize first where student loan forgiveness is concerned. And then we owe, nobody's gonna like this when I say it, certain groups not gonna like it. We owe millennials and we owe Gen Z. Let me tell you why we owe. Because that group has suffered the most from the 2 economic recessions. 2008 took away your job possibilities. And now COVID-19 is taking away your job possibilities and taking away your savings. So that those 2 groups disproportionately suffered literally from the sins of their fathers. And so we now have to look at programs that can create relief for those 2 groups. I haven't heard anybody else say that, Q. Listen, I haven't heard anybody else talk about those 2 groups being disproportionately affected.
Not those. I would say not those groups specifically. I have looked into the plans for Biden and Trump. I couldn't find a plan from Trump. I looked on the website. I tried. I did. Couldn't find it. I did find a plan from Joe Biden, but it wasn't specifically targeted to said groups like you just said. So there is a distinction. That are listening. Now you said something else. You keep segueing. I feel like we just vibed. You keep segueing because you said that this particular generation is paying for the sins of their fathers, right? And so my mind automatically, which is my next question, I'm like, sins of the fathers. Well, let's talk about something that I heard you say a couple weeks ago. I happened to catch one of your Instagram lives. I caught it after the fact. You posted it on your page, and you said something. You were talking about faith. But you said something that really struck me. You were talking about being a Christian, and you said that you are a follower of Christ. Many people might not think that is that big of a deal. Like, what's the distinction? But the reason it struck me is because that is how I identify. Most people call themselves a Christian, And for whatever my own, just thinking about certain things in religion and how people have used and abused, I started changing how I identified myself. And I started using the phrase follower of Christ. And so when I heard you say that, it made me want to talk to you even more, because I'm like, why did you choose that phrase? And what does that mean for you personally? And what does that mean for you politically?
Let me start with that last part, because that's what people really want to know, right? Is what does my faith have to do with anything? Why would I dare even bring that up? Separation of church and state, all this stuff. So the reason I'm open about it is because if I'm not, and you go digging and find out she's a minister, she wrote a book on prayer, she's talking about God, you then have to wonder if I'm like all the other Christians you've seen. And you're gonna have to flush that out for yourself. I'd rather just come out front and tell you what it means to me. My faith is an internal expression of how I treat people externally. So my faith just helps me decide. Even if we don't believe exactly the same, I'm still supposed to honor you, protect you, and serve you, especially as commander-in-chief, especially as head of state, especially as president. Because my job as president is to make sure that access to opportunity is afforded you, that safety and protection are afforded you. And so my faith, it just so happens that that's what Christ also preached, honor, right? And so that's why I'm open about my faith. It will determine in terms of leadership. It doesn't mean that I'm trying to make everybody in the U.S. a Christian. It's just that I'm being upfront about where my source is, where my inspiration is, and where I look to in terms of modes of operation, of how I carry myself and how I treat people. That's what it does for me politically. It just tells me, listen, whether or not I do it as a good person or as a follower of Christ, I feel led to honor, love, protect, and serve all people in spite. Now, why do I choose follower of Christ? That's a recent development, Q. I'm keep it real. And it's because of what I suspect is your reasoning as well. I really want to make sure there's a distinction between myself and the religious hypocrisy I've seen, the religious manipulation in the name of power. And it's, I saw an incredible article last year about millennials who no longer were identifying as Christian or how been hiding. One of the reasons, and I've been courted by Republicans and Democrats to run for office.
Say that part again. You were breaking up a little bit. You said an article where people are no longer identified as Christian.
Millennials who were no longer comfortable calling themselves evangelicals, especially, and Christians, even though that's how they grew up. And it's a very difficult spot to be in, but I don't identify with what I'm seeing on the right. I also feel like I have a stronger stance on things that may not fit in well with the Democratic Party. And if I don't feel represented powerfully, why should I be forced to pick and choose? Well, if you're Black, you must be Democratic. If you're Christian, you must be Republican, when neither are speaking my heart. And so what we're seeing though, is we're seeing other Christians from the right and the left, from the right who are saying, listen, I might have voted based on abortion or Supreme Court justice, but I can no longer hitch my wagon to this man. Like, look, I believe in social justice and that we need to work for programs that create equality and help people build a pathway out of poverty. But I also have a strong stance about, let's say, the sanctity of life, and they don't feel welcomed anymore on the left. And so we feel a powerful responsibility to speak what we feel is truth, and then to serve people because of that truth, not to divide us further because we identify as Christian. We feel like that identification as being a follower of Christ lets people know at least what our model is as we're walking through this earth.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. That is absolutely the reason I choose to identify as a follower. That's been a thing. It's new for you, like you said. That's been a thing for me, I think, almost a year, when I just sat down and really thought about it. And so, well, let's push in a little bit more, because you did talk about the sanctity of life. I have visited. Excuse me, I don't want to misquote your website. What is your website again? Operation Restoration 2020, right?
OperationRestoration2020.com.
2020.com. I did get a chance to look at it, and I saw. Side note: whoever came up with the post-it note idea for the policies, Brilliant. That was that you? Brilliant.
That was me.
Because we don't want to. Okay. So
nobody wants to scroll through 6 reads.
Right. Like I've read some stuff on other websites. Like I said, I've looked at other policy platforms, but I was like, this posted size note. Okay, can we just adopt that? Like, because that was so quick to the point. Thank you. I get it. Thanks.
Yeah.
But on one of your policy platforms, you talk about the sanctity of life, this argument between pro-choice and pro-life. And so what I wanted to put on the floor is where, as the next commander in chief, along with being a follower of Christ, like how do you navigate that water, right? Because it's such a politically divisive conversation. It is more than a politically divisive conversation. It's just a divisive conversation. And so I know a lot of people, if you are commander in chief, people are going to want to know where you stand on it, right? And how do you look forward? Now, I've already heard you talk on it, but I want you to talk about it now, please.
A couple of phrases you used. It creates a divisive conversation, and you said argument, which is what a divisive conversation is. And what are we going to achieve if all we're doing is arguing? Here's what I want people to get smart about. We know that. 2 lay people right here know that. We know it's a divisive conversation, yet both sides purposefully continue to have a divisive conversation, which tells me we have to question the genuineness of either side to actually see solutions that serve people. When stalemates are allowed, people are the only ones who are left out of that. And what happens is it keeps one or the other party in power based on those divisive arguments. So we call it being pro-human. What that means to me is I care about life from the womb to the tomb. And I always say so to my pro-life friends, don't you spend all day telling me about the baby in the womb and how precious that is, which I agree. And let me just be unequivocal and say, I do believe that abortion is wrong. I do believe it's a stain on the soul of our country. I do believe we have blood on our hands because of that. That being said, my focus is not on reversing legislation because I think that would be largely symbolic. So where I look at is if we say that the baby in the womb is sacred, I need you to tell me the people dying at the border are sacred. I need you to tell me that when you snatch people off of assistance, that when you don't help people get out of poverty, those are lives also. That needs to be sacred. And I need to have Breonna Taylor be just as sacred as the baby in the womb. And we don't hear that bridge. So now for my pro-choice friends, I say, okay, let's focus now on the other issues that create a continued decrease in abortion. The good news is abortion has decreased, I think, for the last 20, 25 years. We don't hear that. That's great news. And I don't think anybody is out there going, we want more abortions. I don't think nobody really says that. Really what one side is saying is we don't want you telling us to do with our bodies. And the other side is saying we believe that even those bodies, even those lives are sacred. All right. And so I believe there's a bridge there. What if we focused as well on pay equity for women? If we know the number one cause of abortion is an unplanned pregnancy and usually has to do with financial difficulties, what if we enabled it so that women were first of all getting paid as much as their male counterparts, and that if they wanted to choose life, they could afford it, so that finances was never the reason. You see, victimization is never the reason. So we look at focusing on taking away all of those reasons that cause a woman to choose not to carry to term. It's not that she doesn't even want the baby. In those cases, what am I going to do about that? It's your preference, right? But in all issues where we can eliminate a hardship that is causing someone to think that life is not viable, that's where I want to focus. And our pro-life friends should feel good about that because the mission is still achieved. We've got to be mission-oriented and not argument-oriented in this season.
Yeah. I think that's a great point that you just made about the trying to bridge the divide, because life is sacred from the womb to the tomb. And so I'm in agreement with you. The baby in the womb needs to be just as sacred as the kids on the border. Like, I'm rocking with you on that one. And I think I feel like God would mourn them equally. You see what I'm saying? I don't feel like the distinction. And I also think when
the narrative that comes out when a Black man is killed, and then we hear all the emphasis on his criminal record. I don't think that God makes that distinction. I don't think that he says, because this person was a criminal, committed a sin, I don't care about their life. And people will say that, when they look at my stances on LGBTQ and different LGBTQ, they'll say, well, we think those people are sinning, those people are wicked. And I say, okay, well, let's play that out. Let's play that out. If you really think they're wicked, then there's scripture that says God cares about the wicked. So
let's pause, because again, y'all, I promise I didn't give her the list. That is literally, I kid you not, that is literally my next question.
Oh, wow.
But what I want to do really quickly is we're going to take a quick break, and then we are actually going to get into that LGBTQ conversation. And I lined it up this way because of that scriptural context, and you are boldly boldly proclaiming, your faith in Christ Jesus. And so that's another divisive conversation, right, with the LGBTQ community. So we're gonna take a quick pause, people. Y'all stay right here, and then we will finish up this conversation on the other side. Welcome back, guys, to the Q with Q. I am having such an amazing conversation with Miss Jade Simmons, who is running for the President of the United States as an independent candidate, and not just an independent candidate that has filed paperwork. Okay, so we're not playing games. Paperwork is filed. Okay, Sis has electors that she's signing up. Sis is really doing this thing, and what we were talking about prior to the break was Jade's stance, or Jade's position on LGBTQ issues as a person who is a follower of Christ, and what that means scripturally, politically, personally. We're talking all things. So Jade, please take that away on that last point you were making.
Yeah, I think we were releasing all these different policies, and in my inbox, there was like a week where every day in my inbox, someone would say, okay, I hear what you're saying, I like you, but where do you stand on LGBTQ? I mean, like every day. And it would just come in and like, I hear what you said about this, but where do you stand? And so our position as first of all, we strategically release policy. Can you hear me?
You were breaking up. You were breaking up a little bit, but I want to make sure people get it. Go ahead and start again for me. I said, so the way we look at policy is we strategically release it, and we've taken our time with it. Everything you've seen written on the website, that policy has been written by me. And the reason I wanted that is because I know that President Trump doesn't write his policy, probably doesn't read his policy. I know that Vice President Biden possibly doesn't have a strong hand in actually writing. And did he create his Lift Every Voice plan? So I wanted that when you see policy, you're actually hearing my heart. And what we come up with the policy by sitting with people of each of the communities who would actually be affected by it. So one of the first things that I did is I have a board of advisors, and I sat with friends, loved ones from the LGBTQ community. And I said, what's the main thing I need to know? And one lady said, first of all, you need to know that marriage is not the only issue. And she said the political conversation always gets hijacked by marriage. And that's not even, she's like, that's this much of what the community is dealing with. And the way that we formulated policy was, how do we serve humans? So we stripped away the labels and said, how would we serve each human equally? So it just so happens my LGBTQ stance about protection is the same way I'm going to protect women. It's the same way I'm going to protect men. But what I say is, first of all, we're going to disagree on some issues. We're not going to define marriage in the same way. We're going to disagree. And as long as we start there and put that on the table, now we can have a discussion. Because my job is not to convince you to believe like me, and that's not your job. My job then as the leader is, how do I serve you and protect you? So we put a lot of our focus for the community on things like making sure hate crimes aren't committed disproportionately, especially, but against the LGBTQ community. Discrimination with employment and housing, that's just wrong, period, no matter who you do it to. But we see a disproportion when it comes to people in the gay community. And so we focus on those areas
and especially things that were also unique. The fact that if you have a same-sex couple, they're not given the same healthcare rights. They're not allowed to make the same decisions often, especially in states that don't allow marriage. And so we listened, we prayed over that thing, Q. I said, when I put it out here, the thing is, when we didn't want to put anything out, have to retract or pander.
Right.
So
please don't pander.
We wanted to be able to put something down firmly and let the chips fall. And when I tell you, I was so blessed that when we released our stance, we had members of the community hailing it, conservative Christian pastors going, that's it. That's how we're supposed to operate. And so we know that when we get buy-in from a broad political spectrum, then we know we've hit the nail on the head. And I think lastly, what's important to me, no matter what people group we're talking about, is that your rights always end where the next person's rights begin. So we've got to be fair across the board, that as we start to make sure we attain more rights for one group, it doesn't necessarily equal the decrease of rights for another. And that's where things get tricky and have to be balanced. And I think other political parties try to weaponize that instead of finding out how do we live together and not just tolerate. I hate that word. Toleration is like 101 human behavior. It's the lowest level. You got hatred, then you got tolerance. That's how I look at it, right? I think we should be able to not just accept, we should be able to literally love one another, literally honor one another. And that's been exciting to watch people fold into that and feel differently about how we are not just talking, but how we are moving.
Yeah. And so what I feel like I've heard, and please don't let me misrepresent, in these two topics, when we talk about abortion and when we talk about LGBTQ rights, what I think I'm hearing is, on a base level, finding a bridge so that as a leader, right, everyone has equal rights. And like you said, more right, we want to get to a place where it's not more rights for some, a decrease in rights for others. It's not a pie, right? So we just want equal rights. I think what I would hear from other people is, well, what is in bridging the gap and in getting into the leadership position, even though you disagree with some fundamental things from both issues, are you going to advocate for a going back, if you will? I heard you mention that on abortion, like you're not in there advocating trying to overturn legislation. But what about with the LGBTQ community? Are you of a position, you made it clear you disagree with the marriage equality, so are you in a position where you want to overturn that, or are you in a position where this is what it is, but we need to create bridges and pathways to where everyone is equal? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, I don't focus a lot on overturning much of anything because, first of all, we have free will. We have free will. And in many cases, the people have spoken. And so all that means, though, is I get to, run my family how I want to run my family. You get to run your family how you want to run yours. Now, my job as leader is different than my role as neighbor, right? So my job as leader now is not, I want to be careful when we talk about, I'm not against marriage equality, but if we talk about how do I define marriage, we're going to define it differently. So I'm not looking to take away marriage equality where it's been gained. That's definitely not what I want to do. What I actually want to do is, especially in those places that have that, is it fully equality? Is your health care where it needs to be? Are you able to get a job in the same way? Are you being fired because of your gender identity versus being fired if you're not performing right on the job? So you won't hear me talk about overturning because it's not the aim. The aim, though, is to make sure that as I disagree, my disagreement with you doesn't equal a decrease in rights or harm to your person. And so if I'm here talking about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I got to care and be just as outraged about a transgender woman who's lost her life, to hate crime. I've got to be equally outraged. So a part of that common ground, you hear that theme of finding what I call uncommon common ground, is also to have equal outrage. So I'm equally outraged about George Floyd as I am about Black people having crime in their own communities. I don't call it black on black crime because that's a distraction. So that's a distraction because we know that every people group kills itself more than it kills another. But I will say I'm equally outraged about crime in our community, and it does bother me when we aren't as upset about that as we are about race-based murder, which is what I believe George Floyd's death was. So I talk about that uncommon common ground and equal outrage that I want to see us now be consistent. And us meaning, like I said, my pro-life people, I want you to be consistent. My pro-choice people, I want you to be concerned about making sure women can choose life. You know, maternal mortality rates, I want us to be equally concerned. I want us to be equally concerned about family planning. So it's like a leveling out now. Instead of that division has only kept the people who are already in power. It's never served the people. We're always the ones suffering under the division of the two power groups.
Yeah. And in keeping in true fashion, you touched on one of the next questions. So we're just gonna keep it vibing. We must be vibing in this meeting because I'm like, all right. So let's talk about police and criminal justice reform. You mentioned George Floyd. What are your thoughts? What are some policies that you want to see implemented should you become commander in chief that would either reform or not reform the system? Where do you stand on that?
Well, first of all, my major concern, if we re-elect the current president or if we elect Vice President Biden, is that we lose this moment to symbolism. I think we're already wasting political capital, and this is going to be controversial to say. There's been so much energy given into pulling down statues, Aunt Jemima off the shelf, the statements of solidarity, which I question, by the way. All of a sudden, we all have these statements of solidarity as if we couldn't for ourselves and corporations for themselves judge that these injustices exist. So I think what happens is if all we do is put Vice President Biden in office, we're going to get a feeling of, well, we did it. We got the big bad Trump out, got some statues down, Confederate flag came down in some places. Pat on the back. We knelt at the state capitol with our kente cloth on. That's my concern. So reform has to now have three components. On the website right now, we've launched with programs that would create Breakthrough Black America. The other two components must be economic injustice has to be dealt with, as well as law enforcement and police brutality. So specifically to that last issue, I talk about nuts and bolts. You got to get rid of qualified immunity. Why are we talking?
That's right? Exactly what I was about to ask in my head. If we don't start there,
shut up talking to me. You see what I'm saying? Like, we're not serious. You can't have reform in an institution when the go-to move is, well, I was doing my job, so you can't have it. So that has to be dealt with. Justin Amash, who was the first independent member, one of the independents, and he's now libertarian. He's now saying he's libertarian. But he led with that bill, and I really like him because he's strategic. He was the one I heard say, the way we pass laws right now, it's like performance art. There's no real intent to see the reforms. So we packed in all this verbiage and it's 1,600 pages, and we know somebody's going to disagree, but we make a show of it. Look at how we're standing for you. And what he does is says, let's do one issue at a time. And he led with.
I like Justin Amash. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he led with that. And that's, again, another one who he identifies with a certain, party, but he's just speaking common sense. He's just speaking a lot of common sense. I think we also have to be very careful. I used to use this language in the beginning. I've gotten more careful about it, talking about bad apples, because I do have police friends who will say, listen, nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop, because they're out there messing up how we can do our job, which I do believe. But I also think it'd be naive to think that we can leave reform up to the place that's the reform. Right. So he talks a lot about reallocation of funds, right? So crisis prevention needs to be our mode of operation. Why? Because it serves the community. That looks like a partnership. That looks like creative collaborations between law enforcement, social work, psychological services, family services. used to talk about a case I read about, and I forget now which state it was in, but they show up on the scene. A guy is suicidal, has a weapon. Because he has a weapon, they got to call police. But police comes on the scene with the social worker. Police, they get rid of the weapon and then they step back. They de-escalate. Social work moves in. Social work was able to actually talk him down. That's how they got the weapon from him. They find out he hasn't been on his medicine. EMS is there. They give him medicine, feed him a sandwich so he doesn't get sick off the medicine. Situations de-escalate. Now, I do know that that was a white man in that situation. I can't promise you it would have gone the same way with a person of color, but that needs to be our mode of operation. Now, when you talk about that, you don't get police officers who say, don't fund that. You get them saying, listen, most of my calls are that, and I don't even need to be there. So they are for that funding. But when we use the hyper fired up rhetoric, like dismantle police, defund police, instantly the conversation's disallowed. And so what'll happen is you'll have the president hijack the phrase, reinterpret it, and tell people they're coming to your suburbs because they're getting rid of the police. And so I think we've got to be smarter and strategic in the wording, in the semantics, because they matter. They matter in terms of progress. So I want to see more money going towards mental health services, crisis prevention, creative partnerships. I also want to see a rooting out of the good old boy network in the police system because it exists. We saw it live on camera with Derek Chauvin. And I'll tell you how we know we saw it, because the guys who were with him, the other cops, didn't do anything. Why? Because they knew he's an untouchable. This guy has more than 15, 16 violations. They haven't done anything with him yet. If we touch him, next time we call for backup, are they coming to help us? That system has to be undone. I'll end by saying one of the ways that I think we should consider, I think it's New Jersey, that kind of wipes the slate clean. Every few years, you're going to get rehired. We're going to reevaluate you and see if you still match up. What are those violations looking like?
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's very powerful. But I don't believe we get rid of police altogether. I think you got some criminals waiting for that day going, let's do it. I don't think that's what you do.
So let me say, you said a few things. Yeah, you said a few things that stuck out to me, especially with the to your cop friends, that the good ones that they are upset at the bad cops. I do think there is a culture of policing though as well, right? Where good cops aren't speaking up enough. And to your point, can I touch this person because the next time I need backup, is somebody gonna come? So absolutely, I think the restructuring, I'm in agreement. It cannot come from the end. Now, my only pushback is the defunding of the police, saying the only reason me personally, I don't have an issue with it. I think sometimes there doesn't seem to be as much outrage when other things are defunded, like when they defunded education,
that's right,
defunded social, social services, and so nobody was in an uproar at that point. My concern is that sometimes
you defund education.
You said what?
We defund education and we expect them to still perform at the height of
exactly. And my concern is that some societal, as a society, we have propped up police officers as almost demigods, right? Like they get to be a blue life and they get to be a citizen all at the same time. But you're not really a normal citizen. You've been endowed with power that we as the community have given you. So there is a certain amount of responsibility that is there. And so I understand, obviously, when they say defunding the police, but I also think that with anything that anybody says that is of substance, it's always going to be co-opted. So I'm kind of at a point where I'm like, well, I mean, at this point, baby, just say what it is and move on, so.
I don't have a problem with what it actually is, which is a reallocation. It's not that you're some cases it will be you're taking all the money away. That's what some people want. But when most people say it, that's not what they mean. They mean better fund the other thing. So I intentionally say the phrase reallocation so I don't have to go through, do this
that
with
whole
you,
thing.
Solution I'm trying to get to.
Yeah. And as a former master level social worker in my previous life before I did this, I think that might be a great idea. But we're gonna need some highly trained social workers to go out there with the cops. But I think that might be that might be a good one. Yeah. So let's push in. And we are running up against the clock, so I want to get these in. Let me ask a different question. So the first 100 days of any presidency is always like the big thing. Like, what is the president going to do? What are you going to accomplish in the first 100 days? If you were to be elected as president, what would you want to accomplish? Like, give me maybe 3 big policy achievements that you would want to implement, whether realistic or not, with Congress, and we understand how that whole thing works. But for you personally, what are 3 things? What are the first 3 as president you would want to implement?
Yeah, I think the key is being strategic and choosing the things that nobody can argue with. And the problem is that those first 100 days have become a vanity project for most presidents. They think firstly about their legacy, what they want to lead with, and they think they're going to achieve legacy in the first 100 days, and they create instant pushback. So we know now, I believe, the first 100 days of 2021 are going to have to be based on the last quarter of 2020. And unfortunately, it's not looking good in terms of managing COVID-19. So the next commander-in-chief, which I would be proud to be, that head of state is going to have to look at 3 things instantly. How do you put more money back in Americans' pockets? How do you create jobs? Not just reopen, but many of these jobs that have closed are not coming back. So we're looking at job creation, and we're looking at the management of COVID-19. And the way that I would deal with that is something I call pandemic proofing, which is a whole system that talks about not just dealing with COVID-19 now, but how do we get our nation ready for the next pandemic and the next pandemic and the next one. Also, jobs-wise, how do we make the U.S. become now the center of manufacturing and production so that we can be the suppliers of everybody else's storehouses? We've been so busy trying to get our act together. We're just trying to keep our storehouses supplied. We should be thinking ahead now. How do we become the source instead of having to go to China and Mexico to get our own PPE? And so I think you can create a whole different industry called ongoing emergency preparation. That now will re-employ so many Americans who were put out of work during COVID-19, because those are jobs that we can train for, like testing and tracing. We're going to need a lot of new infrastructure. So one of the things I'd like to do is incentivize new construction to build in infrastructure that will help us in the next pandemic. So imagine if our stadiums could instantly be flipped into emergency sites, pull down balls, beds coming out of the walls, places that were literally designed so that when the next emergency hits, we're not retrofitting from the beginning. That stuff's already in place. I have to tax incentivize that kind of building. And then after you control and manage the spread, get your testing and tracing in line, create new jobs with that. Then you get to also, I think one of the first things we have to do is raise the minimum wage. And then I think I would also, because it hadn't been raised in 2009. So if you even just go to $10 on day one, that's going to increase wages for, I think, 16 different states. I think you got to be at least $15 by the end of not even the end of the first term, by 2022. And by the way, Congress has supposedly been working on this, but we've had a Democrat and a Republican in office since then, and we've not seen an increase. That tells us the two parties work together on some stuff, and stalemate intentionally on some things too. And then lastly, I will say what I think is important is to give Americans a break. So we're going to need a sales tax break. The president wants to do a payroll tax break, but that only helps people who already have jobs. If you do a sales tax break for the first 100 days, imagine the relief. That means that if you don't have a job, the money you do have left stretches farther. So those are kind of 3 to 4 things that I would do that you can't argue with. You can't argue with those things. And if you're out there arguing against minimum wage being raised for your people are looking at you sideways. If you're out there arguing against preparing for the next pandemic, people are looking at you like, what's wrong with you? Did you not just see us suffer through 2020? So you start with the things that create more instant prosperity and more safety. That's the position we're going to be in 2021.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Real quick, do you know if you will be on a debate stage with any other candidates as far as the Libertarians or the Green Party candidates? Is that something that's coming up, or are you aware of?
I would love to be on a debate stage with President Trump and Vice President Biden. I'd be chomping at the bit to do so. What people don't know is there is literally a legally binding agreement that the two parties have signed to keep all third-party voices off the stage with them. when they're in their major network debate. So don't believe the hype that red and blue don't work together. They work together very closely in order to keep a third voice out. So we are still fighting to be on that stage, even though you have to go to court to do it. So we are also looking at some creative ways to make sure that you hear my responses to what is happening in the debate in real time. So that's something we're excited. We're not going to sit around and wait for the invitation. Listen, Q, the stuff that we have seen behind the scenes, they would never believe it. We were told by a producer that they've been following me for months and refused to cover me because I'm too compelling, that they didn't want to risk putting Biden in trouble. The media should not have a side. We had a producer tell us, no, she's a distraction to what we're trying to do. Well, who is we, and why are you trying to do something? You're a media outlet. And I'm talking about network stations. And so we refuse to play along in some of the ways, but we're excited. We have a commercial coming out very soon that will see some national distribution. And we have some other ways up our sleeves to get our faces and voices out there in these last few days.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Okay. Well, in our last couple minutes, we like to have a little fun.
Let's do it.
So you mentioned it earlier, and my people tell me, you are a renowned pianist, and you have played at the White House and the Supreme Court. What? What is that all about?
Yeah, that's what I did my education in. My undergrad and graduate degree was in music performance. And as a little girl, I just wanted to be a classical concert pianist. So, my day job is Mozart, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, but my career evolved. I wanted to see a more diverse audience, and I wanted to feel like more of myself on stage. So my concerts actually go from Rachmaninoff all the way to rap, believe it or not. I create my own. I create music, produce as well. And so, I have these, I was one of the best of South by Southwest back in 2014. I've been a recording artist. I'm a Yamaha artist currently. So I'm on the classical side, Alicia's on the pop side. I'm on the classical side. But so that is the basis of my initial career, which has evolved as we've discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, that's cool. And something that does not happen, at least in my generation, it's a rarity. You're married to your high school sweetheart?
Yes.
How does that work? Because in 2020, baby, marriages only last 20 minutes.
I'm thinking it.
How?
Listen, we are complete opposites. And they say opposites. We've been together since we were 15. So we met in Spanish class back at St. Andrews High School. So we have 2 kiddos. I have a 12-year-old son, a 6-year-old daughter, and we're all here in Houston. And they don't speak each. We do, back from the Chuck, we have our island accent kind of a thing. But it's one of the most incredible blessings, Q, to be married with someone who's literally grown up with you. So he's been a rock during all of this, and he's a strong, silent type, but you'll be seeing more of him soon.
Yeah, cool. Well, that's amazing. That is amazing. And lastly, in my research of you as well, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, I found that your father is a civil rights activist, and he gets out there and he marches in the streets. I looked. I Googled him. I did. So how did that, obviously that clearly, had some impact on your life, because he's been doing it for so long, but what does that mean to you? How do you take that and pay it forward? It's very interesting because my father is apolitical. He doesn't trust anybody on any side. He's not in the Urban League, the NAACP, none of it, because he always felt like it all fell short where the Black community especially is concerned. His big fight is against gentrification. Charleston is a beautiful city, but it's literally an original slave port. That downtown area is becoming an all-white area where all the prosperity goes to everybody but Black people. So that's his fight. My dad will tell you he's the angry Black man, so I don't have to be. And so this is bittersweet for him, because you talk about go out in the streets. He's never not been in the streets. I'm 42, and my father protests every weekend. He's taken me to KKK rallies since I was a little girl.
He wanted me to see what that stuff looked like up close. And he's been forefront of the fight of getting the Confederate flag off of the state capitol in South Carolina. So my father's a radical. And so, you know, people who get worried because they're going to dig him up like you did and go, oh, she's radical. The difference is my father has had to lean hard on his radicalism because of the era that he grew up in. His hope is that his daughter does not adopt all the anger, but that is, he'll say, Jade, you're able to go into spaces that I would never be invited into. And so there's certain principles that he's given me, justice, and the reason I'm running, which did not make him happy at first, because he did not want his little girl being in this world and seeing a lot of the hypocrisy that I've seen. And I've seen a lot. We'd have to have a whole other hour to get into that stuff. But his big thing was, if you see an issue, if you see a voice missing, if you see a void, why are you complaining about it? Why aren't you filling it? And so that's what you're watching, Q. You're seeing someone who was complaining for the last 5-6 years, saying, when is anybody going to say what really needs to be said? You know, even when President Obama was in office, I still felt like things weren't being said. And so my pledge has been to keep it real. I feel like any interview you watch, you're going to hear some consistency. That's something my father would find important, is that I'm not changing up the script depending on who I'm in front of, and that I'm keeping it real. So I hope that he feels, I know he does, he feels honored by it. He tells me all the time. He do things a little differently than I do it. So people need to be thankful that it's me running and not him, because he doesn't pull any punches, but he's proud. He's proud of what I'm doing.
I mean, you know, the term radical, I mean, people consider Jesus a radical. So, I mean, there's that, you know. So my last question to you, and it's I hope to not, with this question, even just minimize your candidacy, but I really want to know, as a Black woman, you know, let's be clear, running for president, the audacity of it all, right? Running for president, running as an independent candidate, right? And running as a follower of Christ. There's so many layers to that, right? There's so many, I mean, there's like, let's just be real. There are people that will listen to this and take in what you have to say. And then there are people that are going to listen to this and automatically write you off as a distraction, right? Or like, this isn't real. So I just want to know, as a woman, as a Black woman, as a follower of Christ, all these things that make you you, what has this experience been like thus far?
You know, it's so wild, because I dove in expecting pushback and backlash from very specific groups of people. And I also expected acceptance and encouragement from very specific groups. And I will tell you, I was blown away by how wrong I was. We are getting more buy-in by non-Christians, non-Black people, non-female.
Wow.
Yeah, that was early on. We are catching traction now. My biggest opposition has been from Black people. I prepared for my biggest opposition to be from racist, from chauvinist. I've probably faced more chauvinism from Black women, telling me to stay in my place, that I should run for the PTA instead. Who do I think I am? And which I'm like, we should be in the PTA too. Like, that's good, right? But just a dismissiveness, a very hard dismissiveness that I was shocked by. But I'll tell you what, these last 3 to 4 months, we've caught fire with younger Black community, people who probably align more with, you know, wanting to see real progress for Black people and minorities. Progressives, white progressives who loved Bernie Sanders, who are disappointed he's not the nominee, are finding a home in us because we talk about real solutions for real people, and especially for working poor. My corporate friends who believe that corporate has gotten a bad rap, who don't like maybe the demonization that Elizabeth Warren put on them, because she was, you know, calling them all devils basically. They love the fact that I'm saying, listen, corporations are technically people, but you can't build the American dream on the backs of American workers and not have them share in the reward. And then I'm finding buy-in from conservatives who just want to see more people be served, but maybe they're concerned about the deficit, or they have more conservative views about our foreign policy. And so we have just decided to accept and receive all of those who accept and receive us. And the wonderful thing is that group has been larger than the group we expected buy-in from. So when you got agnostics and atheists lining up with you, when you dare to say one nation under God, you know you're doing something right. When the LGBTQ community is some of our biggest and most outspoken supporters, and you're blatantly Christian, right? Follower of Christ, then you know you're doing something right. You know that you're speaking from the heart, that it has been seen that your heart is for people, and that even if you dare to champion people of color, African Americans, immigrants, small business owners, farmers, we are intentional about micro-targeting different groups that have historically been underserved. And that has resonated. So when you say, how has it been? It's been a roller coaster. It's been eye-opening. It's really weird in the age of Black Lives Matter, Black Girl Magic, Black Voices Matter, to be rejected sometimes from Black organizations. That we have not had one meeting with the NAACP. They refuse to meet with us in the different cities we go into. That's been eye-opening. Just to say, hey, I'm here. We didn't want to come to your city and disrespect you by not letting you know we were here. And yet they wouldn't make the time to see us. And so that's been the stuff that's been wild, right? We thought just the sheer audacity would be celebrated, and the motives of wanting to offer something different would be celebrated. But I'll tell you, the joy comes from the fact of when people see our hearts cue, the conversion factor is real. When they do their research, they come in and they go all in. And we're seeing people who were planning on sitting out the election, voting for us now, people who were never registered, getting registered. I love your shirt. Getting registered to vote, right? And we're watching who are disgruntled Democrats, restless Republicans, muted middle, finding a home in us. So that has canceled out anything negative. When I got white corporate men out there saying that Jade Simmons is their candidate, I can't be mad with the few that don't believe in us or don't see what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So well, a whole other hour. That's a whole other hour right there to unpack.
Yeah. But no, that was good. I'm thankful. I'm thankful that, you had this conversation with me. I'm thankful for the transparency, there at the end. Really, I mean, transparency throughout the whole conversation. Yeah. Let us know one more time where we can follow you, where we can read more Post-it note size policy.
Yeah.
Where can we go to find you?
We want you to do your due diligence. We think not doing that is what's gotten us in the position we're in. So hold us accountable at operationrestoration2020.com. More Post-it size notes coming out this week on the military, on more of our issues on police reform. You'll see that this week. And then you also be with me on Instagram, official Jade Simmons, and Facebook, Operation Restoration 2020. Normally, I respond personally to a lot of your questions on policy. I'm a little busy these days, so it might take me a while to get back to you, but we want to hear from you. We want to hear what's resonating with you. And we say, if you enjoyed this, if this resonates with you, let people know that we're here. Let people know we're viable. In almost 45 states now, you'll be able to vote for me. So we're making sure, and we'll release that list to let you know whether or not you'll see me on the ballot, whether or not you vote for me as a registered write-in. That means it's legal, it's not wasted, it's a real vote. And lastly, stop talking about split vote. That's how they keep us scared, cowering behind party lines. Split vote is like Stockholm syndrome. You sympathize with your captor. Listen, this is the to break free. And if everybody who said they were only voting one way because it was the lesser of two evils, if they actually voted for us, if we're their vision, we'd win in a landslide. So we're not going anywhere. We'll be here providing a home for those who aren't satisfied with what they see.
Yeah. That's great. I will say the split vote theory as we wrap up here, not that this was obviously not even on this grand scale. Back when I was in college, I ran for our Student Government President Association, and everybody talked about the split vote because there was myself, another black candidate, and a white candidate. And so they talked about this split black vote. Well, I won, so we ain't split it too much. So, you know.
But you won because the people who believed in you voted for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was gospel is if the people who believed in you voted for the white guy because they thought he could win. You see? That is the problem. That's the problem. If everybody just votes for who they believe in, that vision wins. And that's we want people to vote vision over fear. Don't vote for who you think can win, because if you put vision, if everybody votes for the same vision, the vision wins. The candidate wins as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mrs. Jade Simmons, I am so thankful. Thank you for having this conversation. Absolutely best of luck to you as you continue, you know, on this presidential candidacy. We'll have to chat again for sure.
Let's
have
do.
to chat again.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. You guys definitely make sure you check out Jade. Take some time. Let's not just completely buy into Republican or Democrat. There are other options, as you've seen here. She has a plan, she has a policy. Whether you're all the way bought in or not, do the due diligence to find out who you are going to vote for and who would best serve your needs, not just who you think could win. So this has been the Q with Q with me, your host, Quentin R. Giles. But y'all know we friends, so Q will see you later. Bye, everybody.